You're listening to the Not Your Lawyer podcast with Mona Reza.
Welcome to the Not Your Lawyer podcast. I'm your host, Mona Reza, and I am here today with my dear friend, Realtor Kim Kash. Kim has consistently been recognized as one of the top realtors in the Washington metropolitan area by Real Trends and Washingtonian magazine. She grew up in Prince George's County, Maryland, and has lived all over the world. We are so lucky that Kim chose to come back and be a resource for all of us here. She has offices in Greenbelt, Maryland, and on Capitol Hill, and serves communities and home buyers throughout the region. Before I introduce you to Kim, I have to remind you that although I am a lawyer, I am not your lawyer, and so nothing Kim and I discuss should be considered legal advice. Welcome, Kim.
Thank you, Mona. It's really great to be here, and I look forward to our conversation, just like so many conversations that we have had.
You know, I wanted to do this podcast because I realized that everyone doesn't have access to the rich network of women that we do, and everyone really should, because I think the not so secret to really leveling up in business and in life is the company you keep, right?
Absolutely. Yep.
I always ask, did you know you wanted to be whatever it is that you are now, a realtor, when you were growing up? But for you, it's a little different because you were raised by two local legends in real estate. Did you always think that, yes, that's what I'm going to do? Or did you want to rebel a little when you were younger?
Yeah, it's funny that you asked that question because growing up in a family where both parents ran the family real estate business, I thought that was the last thing that I wanted to do. I said, oh no, it's simultaneously stressful and boring and I want no parts of it. And so the career trajectory that I took was actually quite different. I studied English and journalism, and I worked for many years in communications and the book trade. And it was those communication skills and the sort of stick-to-itiveness and doggedness of journalism that I feel like now that I've come back into the family business, even though it's not a family business anymore, all of those things serve me well. Whatever path you take to get to whatever career you land in, there's probably a sort of a rich mine of information that you already know from whatever you were doing previously.
Absolutely. I did my vision board for the year, and one of the kind of reminders I pulled out for myself was nothing is wasted. There's no experience that means nothing to who you are today, and to remember that as we go through it, right? I think the next question I have for you is, we all have this kind of glamorous view of being a realtor, that you get to go and see these beautiful houses and and you're free, you don't have to be in the office, you're driving around. Tell us about the business pieces that go into having a successful real estate business.
Well, let me tell you first that I do not drive around in high-heeled shoes and walk around in construction sites with, full face of makeup and hard hat. That is entertainment. That is not real. Right. But I would say that there are a lot of aspects to my business that are not glamorous, but they are really fun. I do get to see a lot of very beautiful houses, and as a listing agent, I really get to put a bit of a design eye on people's homes and help them to figure out how best to present them for a sale. And so, no, I'm not meeting with interior designers and spending hundreds of thousands of other people's dollars on renovating homes. It is very satisfying to see objectively properties improve or properties get built, or when properties change hands, what you have to do to make them more interesting and more compelling. I don't know if that answers your question.
It does. It does in a way. And also, I think with every business, it seems like a great idea to be an entrepreneur. And then you get into the weeds of, like, what do I delegate? What do I keep? And I think I've seen you, just in the time we've known each other, really grow in your business. Takeaways for me from watching you was, one, your partnership with Compass. So to have a good partner that can help with some of those things. And it was actually a model for some of what we've talked about I'm doing with our law firm, is to have that strategic partner so you can be your best self and have less of that stress. And the other thing I think you do exceptionally well is you have thought about delegating and hiring at the right time and making sure that you are working at your best use, where Kim Kash really adds value. That's where you want to work, and you found ways to delegate the other pieces. So can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, exactly. So the first piece of it, every real estate agent has to affiliate with a brokerage or start their own. And in my case, I am affiliated with Compass, which is the largest brokerage in the United States, though it's less than 20 years old. It's sort of an amazing success story on its own. I think I made a great decision in hitching my star to that wagon, but they solve all of my technological issues. So I literally don't have to think about what app to use or what design template to use for social media. All of those things are already done by people whose day job it is and whose specialty it is to do that stuff. So not only does it save me time, but it's literally better than anything that I could come up with, because I'm not a designer and I'm not I don't build apps. So there's that piece of it. I think if you're in an industry where you can affiliate with someone with an entity who has solved for all of those things, I recommend it. Why would you not? Don't reinvent a wheel that has already been invented better than you could. So that's the first thing. But the second thing is the delegation of administrative stuff and errand running and document preparation and storage and all of the things that I can hand off. I think I'm pretty much at the point where I have done, so that everything that I'm doing right now is really serving my clients. I'm marketing myself and putting myself out to new clients, and I'm right there for negotiating and strategizing for the deals that I'm working. So I do feel like I have arrived at that point where I'm doing only the things that I'm supposed to be doing. And Mona, the thing that I didn't see coming that I think has been really gratifying is that my business partner and I have hired someone to do a lot of our admin work who is, he's an intern, but we sponsored him to get his real estate license, and he has really, shown a strong interest and an aptitude in this industry. And I fully expect that when he graduates from the University of Maryland, which he'll do at the end of this semester, we have set him up to launch into a career like from the jump. I'm really looking forward to seeing his success, but also I didn't understand how gratifying that would be on my end.
Yeah.
How proud I am of him, and how it also really makes me think about, when I'm devising ways to put more from my plate onto his plate, I have to train him, right? They always say that teaching a thing helps you to learn it better yourself. And I have found that is definitely true. So having an intern has made me really sort of scrutinize my business in ways that I hadn't done before, which is great for me and great
Absolutely,
for him.
because I think stories I love the most are the people who started at the cash register and worked their way up, or in sales, and then are now the CEO of the company. And I don't think that it's an accident that there are so many of those stories, because you can't supervise what you don't understand. And you can't audit, that you have this huge blind spot if you've never actually done the job.
Exactly. And, it's really interesting how you have to break down into pieces and think about how you're going to train somebody to do the stuff that you've just been sort of doing and checking off your list. And so I think the easiest example, but also the a sort of a good illustration, is when I first hired him, I said, "Oh, hey, can you go put some sign writers on my signs?" How easy is that? It's very easy. But what's a sign writer? And does the for sale sign go on the top, or does it go underneath? And how do you connect the rider to the sign?
These are all questions I would have also.
All of these right. All of these just little things where, I'll tell you and then you'll know. It's not hard. But I realized, so I went out the next time I had one, and I put the sign writers off, and then I just took a picture and then I sent it to him. And I was like, okay, here's how you do this. Here's how you do this. Here's how you do this. And then he knew. But then I had him take photos of the, several examples of the next ones that he did, just to make sure that he did it right. And he was putting the right writer in the right place, and he, blah, blah, blah. That's just one easy example of where you go, wow, these things that you never would have thought of need explaining.
And, one of the best pieces of advice, I read a lot of books. So I'm constantly reading something about entrepreneurship and growing businesses. And over and over again, it's this idea of exactly what you said, recording what you've done. So in my industry, it's Loom. As I'm doing it, I'm recording my screen and explaining what I'm doing. And the next step is then putting it in a playbook, an online playbook, because when he moves on and the next person comes, you never want to explain this again. It's right there. His pictures are there. Right. The instructions are there. And then the next person just is able to take over all of this time that you've put in. It's an investment into your employee manual or whatever versus, oh, great, now we have to do this again. So you are a listing agent. That means you generally represent the seller or both.
I do both.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is that typical that people do both?
It is typical. It's a good way to build a balanced business. The two jobs are very different. As a listing agent, I'm helping people to figure out how best to market their property and what price to realistically sell it at. And, all of the things that go into advising people for this, super important step in their life, figuring out how to maximize the value of this thing that is probably their biggest investment. Yes. For most people, for most homes, that is the biggest. And then, which is a very different thing than working with a buyer to figure out, well, should I rent or should I buy? And where should I go? And how much money should I put down? And, can I do this?
And that you bring up a great point, because that even 10, 15 years ago, if you're a buyer, you're a buyer. But now it really has become, should I rent or should I buy? It's much more common, I think, than when we were first home buyers versus now, in the market and the interest rates and just the cost of housing. I'm sure that a lot of people have to make that decision.
I love it when people do come to me legitimately with that question, because I think that there are a lot of assumptions about how I can't afford to buy a house in this market. And it's legit, right? A lot of people really are struggling to figure out how they're going to make that happen. And at the same time, a lot of people are sort of going from the frying pan into the fire by continuing to rent, because landlords are becoming increasingly rapacious.
Yeah. And that's the truth. That brings us to an interesting point. I think the two biggest barriers that I see on my side to ownership versus renting is credit and down payment, right? These are real considerations. The requirements for both are a lot lower for renters than they are for buyers. But on the other side, or maybe it's the same side, what you alluded to, that it's many people's biggest asset. So now it's a risk. You've got this. And I think people think of it as a home. They don't think of it as a part of their business. So it can be a really valuable asset that you have to borrow against for your business.
Yes.
But it's also a very dangerous thing to borrow against your home for your business. Do you have any stories or advice for people who are thinking about it from that perspective, that what will this home mean for them as business owners if you're an entrepreneur and you are buying a home?
I could go in a couple of different directions with that. First of all, I agree with you that you have to really think hard about borrowing against your home if you need cash for your business. On the other hand, if you are in a position where you feel comfortable that you can handle the monthly payments of a second trust on your house, it's a less expensive way to borrow than any other way to borrow. You can rack up credit card debt to start a business, but you're going to be paying back, 15-20% interest.
And also you get a deduction on those loans.
Exactly. So, I suggest that if you're an entrepreneur and you're thinking about starting a business, one of the pieces of advice that I would definitely give you is to go ahead before you start your business, especially if you're sitting in an unfulfilling but, pays the bills W-2 job right now. Go out right now and get yourself the biggest darn home equity line of credit that you can. And don't spend against it. Just open it. Effectively, then you've opened up an empty credit card at a lower interest rate with positive tax implications before you've launched your business.
That is actually great advice.
Because you won't be able to get it. You won't be able to get it.
And they don't understand it. Years ago, my husband and I were starting out. He's a physician. He went into private practice. And so it's his own business. It was so hard to explain K-1s. And, versus a W-2. There's no W-2. The income's coming from different places. It's an S-Corp. It's an LLC. It's K-1 income. Mm-hmm. And it is complicated. And it's much, much harder to explain that to the bank than it is to pull out a W-2 with half the income on it. and just say, hey, here's what I make. This is the amount of a loan that I want. So that's great advice.
That's right. And I mean, I would say the same thing would go, frankly, for before you launch the business, while you're in the W-2, get as much credit lined up as you can, with the idea, again, that you don't want to go charge it all up when you become your own boss, but you want to have it at the ready, because there are a lot of expenses as as you are launching your business, that you better believe that you're going to be getting that money back, or you shouldn't launch the business. But at the start, there are going to be some expenses that you don't want to be caught short, because you are not at that moment as creditworthy as you just were before you quit your desk job.
And so then as you go further down the road, like, so they've bought the house, they're really happy, they've already gotten the loan. What are some of maybe the things that they didn't think about with home ownership, the legal implications, or the new way of thinking? Now that you're a homeowner, what do you have to worry about? Or just, I don't even want to say worry, because you worry about all kinds of things in life. You have this home, you have the stability of being a homeowner, but it comes with a lot of new legal implications, a lot of responsibilities. How do you prepare your buyers? If you prepare your buyers for, hey, this is what comes next.
Well, I think for any buyer, and this is regardless of whether you want to be an entrepreneur or not, the things that new homeowners need to understand are that, the buck stops here. There's no maintenance guy to call. Well, I mean, I sell a lot of co-ops, and in that case, there kind of is a maintenance guy to call. So that's different. But generally speaking, if you are the homeowner, then it is your responsibility not only to pay the guy to fix when your sink leaks or whatever, but also to just keep an eye on this asset that is your largest asset. I think a lot of people sort of get caught up in their day-to-day life, and they forget to look at their basement stairwell, and suddenly the leaves are all like matted down there and their basement floods, and any number of other examples that, whether or not you consider yourself as sort of a handy homeowner, this is your thing to take care of. It's a point of pride, but it's also a point of responsibility, and you just have to do it. On the other hand, I would say that if you're a homeowner versus a renter, the thing that you don't need to think about is what's going to happen when my lease is up next. Is the rent going to go up? Are they going to be willing to renew my lease, or are they going to do something different with the property, and then I have to figure out what's next? So even though there are a lot of unknowns going into homeownership having to do with the maintenance of this massive responsibility, there are also a lot of things that you're nailing down that you can't as a renter, and that includes knowing that if you can pay your mortgage every month, you can stay. No one can make you leave.
And there's so many protections.
No one can make you leave.
Even if you can't pay your mortgage every month, there are so many protections for homeowners, even if you're filing for bankruptcy, right? In many situations, you have this homestead exemption.
Yeah.
And so it's absolutely, there is a protection there. I think the insurances are so important. Recently, I was on a business trip in Florida, and I was speaking with a realtor there, and they were talking about how insurance will not cover a roof that you did not get a permit to put on the house. And I don't think we have rules like that here, right? Like you can get your roof repaired without going and getting a permit for a roof repair. Is that correct? Or does the roofing company do it? And so I've never really had to think about it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't quote me as an authority on it, but I'm not aware that there are any requirements. If you're making an alteration, if you're, adding a dormer window, or if you're making some change, then yes, you absolutely need a permit. But I'm not aware if you just put a new roof on your house.
Yeah, and I have not heard that here as well. Because what ended up happening was she said a homeowner bought a house. It had a 2-year-old roof on it, and insurance came and pulled the records and said that, they didn't get a permit before they replaced that roof. We won't cover it. So they had to pay to have another roof put on it. And so I think that also brings us back to the value of having a good realtor, right? Somebody who knows those rules and knows how to pull the records and make sure that you're in compliance with your own city or state or county, because it's so tempting to be sale by owner and, I'll just go and buy it. We'll save, is it still 6% or is it now 3%? Because of the changes.
I mean, it's negotiable. It depends on the
well worth it. I'm a little bit biased because I think my advice is well worth it also. It saves you so much heartache to have an expert help you with a transaction in an area that you don't have experience and that is so important to your life.
As somebody who's contemplating a home purchase, when they're choosing a real estate agent, it's important that they understand that a real estate agent's job is to not necessarily to advise them about, do you need a permit for this or that? I'm not a lawyer, so I can't provide legal advice.
We're not doing that anyway
I'm not
here.
a building inspector. So I'm not a building inspector, and I can't provide that advice. There are a lot of things that I can't wade in and tell you this is right and this is wrong. But what I can do is know that there are experts whose job it is to tell you those things, and I can connect you with the good ones.
Absolutely.
Right? That's one of the things that homeowners or would-be homeowners have no way of even knowing. They don't even know what they don't know. So it's important for them to work with a real estate professional who can connect them with a good insurance agent, connect them with a good general contractor who's licensed and bonded, who can connect them with, all of these specialties. And then those people can go deep with answering the questions that need to be answered.
Absolutely. And when you're sitting at the table, I think I had shared with you when we bought our first house, it was during that crazy 2005 market where there were bidding wars. And, you would see a house and it would be gone before you could get back to the office. And we saw a house that we really liked a lot. And I have a rule with real estate is I don't fall in love until the deal is done. Like, I like it a lot, but I'm not going to fall in love until I know I think generally that's my rule with most things. You don't fall in love until you know that this is a good fit. And everything was good. We liked it. Get to the table, and they wanted us to waive the financing contingency. And they wanted us to offer, I think, $15,000-$20,000 over asking. And I know my budget. I know how hard-earned that deposit money was. I was not going to make a deposit and then waive financing contingency. And I also knew what my budget was. And when we finally got to the table with the sellers, they told us that they had 3 deals that fell through. And we asked them why. They had said 2 of the 3 deals, actually 2 of the 3 deals were because the prospective buyer made an offer that the bank would not finance because that's not what the house was worth. And the 3rd one was because the street address was Potomac, but it was actually Rockville. And the person didn't want to live in wonderful Rockville where there were so many services. And so we were like, oh my gosh, yes. We were so happy we made the decision that we made. We called it Rocktomic, and we loved living in Rocktomic. It was the best. So financing contingency, how often does that come up with buyers and sellers?
As you know, we're sort of coming out of another wild housing market where the scenario that you describe is really common. It's really, really common that if you find a house that suits your needs and you want it, you have to basically remove every contingency to get it. And that's frankly no reflection on the seller or any of the professionals involved. Yeah. If there are 15 offers on the table, the seller is going to choose the one without a financing contingency. Of course they are. Why would they not?
Can you explain financing contingency?
Sure. So Mona, you and your husband wanted to buy a house that cost $500,000. You and your realtor are satisfied that you believe that house is worth $500,000. You've done a market analysis. Your realtor has shown you recent comparables that have sold for $500,000. You're thinking, yep, this is worth $500,000, and I think it's worth $500,000, and I have $500,000. Right. So that's what I'm gonna do. So if you write an offer that says, you know what, I'm gonna pay you $500,000, and I don't care what the bank says, then that is a comfort to the seller, such that if an appraiser comes in who is not familiar with Rocktomic and says, no, this house is worth $425,000, appraisers are human, and appraisals are really an art more than a science. And so there is no correct value for a house.
What I'm hearing you say is, don't offer more than you can actually afford without the bank loan.
If you are in a position to close any gap between, in this example, the appraiser says, no, this house is worth $425,000. Well, if you were planning on putting $150,000 down on the house, then you have the capacity to close the gap between what the appraiser says the property is worth and what you and your realtor and the neighbors think the property is worth. So it's not necessarily that anybody is trying to pull the wool over your eyes because they're trying to sell a house at the wrong price, because the price is what the market will bear. That said, In this example, if you were able to write an offer like that with none of the contingencies, the seller is going to choose your offer. The seller is not going to choose the offer of the first-time home buyers who have great jobs but don't have a big down payment, who need the bank to fully fund their purchase, who don't have wealthy family that can help them with the down payment, all the things. So in markets like the one that we're just now coming out of, it's the people who just have deep pockets that are able to get these properties. And so, I would say that right now we're in a market that is leveling out. We're seeing an increased number of inventory, amount of houses that are for sale on the market. We're seeing that demand has come down a little bit because there's more choice to go around. And so now we're in a position where someone who doesn't have a spare $150,000 lying around has a shot.
That was us. That not ideal buyer. That was us. Back in 2005. And I think that what was fortunate was the people before us were not deep pockets either. They just made an offer that they could not afford without the bank, and the bank was not able to float the difference. And of course, that market crashed. We lost like 100,000 in value the following year. So, it's a little bit of a risk, right? Real estate, it's very safe in many ways, but I think, you're absolutely right. You have to know what you can afford. It's not about what your neighbor can afford or what somebody else can afford. If you can afford it and you can ride the wave, it's a real way to create generational wealth for yourself and the future, your family. You and I had talked about revocable trusts and real estate with a matter we were working on together. And something, really interesting in Maryland that I think I'm surprised a lot of people don't know is that when you have a revocable trust, often you divide the property 1/2 into each spouse's revocable trust. But we also have something when a property is held, they call it tenants by the entirety, right? For when a husband and wife own a property together, you have some creditor protection that you don't have if two random people own a property or if it's held as tenants in common. One of our discussions was about the Maryland statute that gives you that same protection when you have a revocable trust, to make sure that that language is included so that you can absolutely each have your own revocable trust, own 1/2 of the property in those trusts, and not lose any of that protection. Is that something that people ask you about, or are they not even really thinking about it?
Most people aren't even really thinking about it. They don't really have that level of knowledge. And this is a really great example of the kind of thing that we were talking about earlier, where if anyone even, broaches that subject, that is the kind of thing that I would definitely recommend that they call you about, right? Because, and this isn't like an infomercial for, but it's an example, right? And so this kind of thing it's a good fit for a lot of families who are trying to protect generational wealth. And it's the kind of thing where, because I know that it exists, I'm in a position to say, you need to talk to somebody who can absolutely, find out what's your particular need and concern and tailor something to what you need, whether it's a revocable trust with, 50-50 for each partner or whatever it is. It's my job to go wide and your job to go deep.
Yes. I think I told you about this. I had a client in DC and they were told by someone to put their property in an LLC. And that's great, right? It's an investment property, put it in an LLC, except it was multifamily and they lived in one of the units. And so many details in those weeds, right? You have a senior exemption, you have a homestead exemption. You start to get these tax credits for all of these things. And if it's in an LLC, you lose all of that. And the other thing that happens is there's a due on sale clause in your mortgage agreement. It's a separate entity. Your revocable trust is you.
They bought it and then put it into the LLC. They bought it.
I mean, God bless, they grew this incredible business based on this property that they bought that, really went up in value and wanted to protect it, give it some creditor protection. They were really nervous about it. It was their main asset. And someone told them that an LLC will give you that protection. It'll be a family business, which makes sense and it's all good, except that they still live there, right? Those little exceptions, they really matter, because now you look at the taxes to see how much are you really saving with the senior exemption or the homestead exemption. Like, where are you? And looking at the mortgage, can you afford to pay this mortgage off? Do you want to have the negotiation with your bank about not triggering the due on sale clause if you move it to an LLC? So these are all considerations that, like you said, boring and stressful at the same time, but,
Right.
but they really impact your life, because this is your home. It's not just a business asset. I think many people, especially these days, you really have to put both of those hats on when we're talking about even residential real estate.
No, it's true. It's true. And, even to take a much less extreme example, my husband and I both have home offices. So even though the property is our primary residence and we own it in our names, we both get tax deductions for this office, for my office, and for his office down the hall. And so that's just one of those things that is just a nice perk.
Yeah.
That as a homeowner, I work out of this office every day. It's one of my offices, and him too. But it's also my business place, one of my business places, and I get a tax deduction. So
absolutely. Yeah. I had a mentor when I was young, and you're trying to figure out this balance of being an attorney and a mom. And she invited me into her home. And I remember her telling me that not only does she deduct the office space, but a quarter of her electricity and her lawn care and everything,
sure.
and I was like, this is incredible. You get to be home and you get to have this business and you get a deduction on top of all of it. So really, there's a lot of value.
While you're doing all of that under the roof of this, amazing thing, historically speaking, there have been bumps in the road, but typically it is appreciating in value dramatically, tremendously, while you're doing nothing. And so, frankly, even if the market crashes, of course, I'm a real estate agent, so I tend to be a fan of owning real estate. But I kind of feel like the stock market also has crashed. And when the stock market crashes, you have nothing. Yeah. You've lost because you didn't own anything to begin with. With real estate, honestly, even in the depths of a recession, if you own your property, you have a place to live.
Absolutely.
It's a tangible thing. For that reason, it's kind of an apples to oranges comparison. When you're talking about, oh, should I invest in the stock market or should I buy real estate? Well, the stock market can't keep the rain off your, head.
No, absolutely not.
So.
And I think that for me, that it was one of the craziest times, because the advice I would give, and I'm absolutely not a realtor, when I was a first-time homeowner, my husband had just finished residency or fellowship, and we got what they called a no-doc loan at the time with a 10% interest rate because they were counting on future income. And what they told us was, this house is going to skyrocket in price, and then you'll just get another mortgage and it'll be at a lower interest rate and you're just going to refi this. So it's this exorbitant mortgage for a very regular house that the game plan is you refi it in a year or two. And it went up a little bit initially. We're like, oh, this is amazing. Our accountant said, rent for 2 more years. Make sure you have a bigger down payment. Make sure that whatever mortgage you get into, from day one, it is an affordable mortgage. And she was so right, because everything that could go wrong went wrong in 2005 to 2007. And nobody's going to refinance if you're underwater. And here you are, and you're weighing this cost of paying so much money for this house when your neighbor has a mortgage that's 50% less than yours, and just over and over again. And then you have to make the decision, right? Do we just keep going with this because there's no equity building, or do we sell at a loss? And now that you're in a better position to get a better mortgage for a new property than you would be for this one, what do you do? And so would you agree with that to make sure that if everything goes wrong, you're still going to be comfortable, so you are able to have that peace of mind?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Fortunately, we're the wild west days of no-doc loans and that kind of thing are behind us. Well, maybe they're in front of us too. I don't know, but they're behind us. At the moment, regulations are very much more strict than they were when you were in that position. The advice still holds that you need, when you buy a house, you need to be buying a house that you can withstand the terms that you've agreed to, and not rely on, as an absolute necessity, rely on having to refinance in the near future, because you can't. The future is not knowable.
The future is not knowable. I think when you're young, you don't realize that. The older we get,
right. But that's true in any investment class.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so you should, with that in mind, right? I knew another business owner who did bet everything on a government contract, put it all on his house. The way government contracts work are they pay you after you do the job.
Yeah.
And he got this big contract. It was for manufacturing apparel. And they provided the materials, they provided the design, took out a loan on his home, started production, and something went wrong with their material was flammable. They canceled the entire order. He lost the home, right? He still had to pay back the loan. I think nowadays, none of us really feel the same security that government is the dependable way to go. I think things are so in flux with government jobs and government contracts. But back then, it seemed like such a solid deal. You would take a letter into the bank that you have a government contract and they would give you a loan for the amount because it was solid.
Yeah.
And so I think that, people hear these things and they feel very anxious about making that investment. But I think you make a great point. It also gives you peace of mind that you wouldn't otherwise have, but you'd still have the anxiety about the economy and the market and so many other things.
Mona, you bring up a good point. Just this notion of it used to be that you really literally could bet your house on the stability of a government contract. That is no longer the case. Similarly, it used to be that you could feel very comfortable in making plans for the future if you had a government job. And that's not true anymore either. Speaking about entrepreneurship and when people are thinking about, should they start their own business? I feel very grateful right now that I work for myself and that I am an entrepreneur, because we're in this unprecedented time right now where, in a lot of ways, the sure thing is to work for yourself.
Absolutely. Right? Like you bet on yourself, not on anything.
Bet on yourself.
I think you and I are big believers in that, and we've seen it, that wherever there's, a problem, there's also an opportunity, and it's being able to find that opportunity. And so much of it is not being afraid. And that's easier said than done, but not being afraid and not limiting yourself in a way that you can't go out and grab it. What is the biggest mistake you've seen first-time home buyers make? Or did I just tell you, it was my mistake, the biggest mistake? Everything that I did was the biggest mistake a first-time home buyer can make.
No, I mean, I think you were doing what people did at that time. I think the biggest mistake that first-time homeowners make is, well, there are two. Number one is being too afraid to leap. I've seen folks be really, really upset and regretful when they saw a house that they loved and they could afford and, all the things. And then they decided to hang back. And then somebody else got it and they couldn't get it. So, that's not a very interesting answer, but that is, I would think, one of the most common regrets that I see folks make. And so I guess that's a mistake. But the other one too is to not trust your gut. I mean, we can talk about all of these things that you really do have to keep in mind that are quantitative about buying a house. And all of that stuff is true and has to line up. But at the same time, there's this qualitative thing about buying, not so much an investment property, but, your home, that, when I see people walk into the house, it's like their face lights up, their eyes get sparkling. They overlook the ugly tile in the kitchen because they like the way the light is coming in the window, or, all of these things that you can't quite put your finger on what it is that they love about it,
Absolutely.
But they love it.
It feels like home.
They love it.
Right? You walk in and you just know this feels like home.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that people shouldn't discount that there is this thing that, I time and time again, I see home buyers, not just first-time home buyers, any home buyer, like really try to talk themselves out of it if they're feeling it, because, it's a feeling. It's not logical. This is going to be your home. Yeah. It should make you feel that
Do
way.
couples agree on this?
So,
in your experience, have you found that they're both on the same page?
When they do, that's the one. That's the one. Yeah.
Right? Because
Yeah,
that's the
yeah.
hardest part, I
But when
think.
they don't, there could be a problem.
Yeah, no, exactly.
Could be a problem.
Exactly. What do you think is more emotional, when you're selling your home or when you're buying your home?
Buying, for sure. For sure. Yeah. I mean, selling, it's not that there's not an emotional thing, especially if you've been there for years and years and, raised your family there. You've got a lot of memories there. So that's often a very sweet time where there's a lot of, recollection
Yeah.
and, it's been a life well lived in the home. There's good memories. It's usually not really regret.
Yeah, right. I think that's you're
I
right.
mean,
It's emotional.
there are exceptions. But for buyers, it's emotional just because it's such a fraught process because they're about to spend like really a lot of money. But at the same time, they're making a decision about, where do I want to spend the next 5 to 7 at least years. 5 to 7 is what they recommend, just as a sort of a very back of the napkin kind of.
Interesting. Not for life anymore. People don't buy homes forever and ever.
Oh, no.
The forever home, the idea
No.
of the forever home has changed.
I have sold so many forever homes.
Yeah, I think we say the same thing with estate planning. I think it actually makes it less stressful that whatever decision you make it for the next 5 years, right? Life changes so much in 5 years. You're not going to want the same guardians necessarily. You may not live in the same state in 5 years. And that does take some pressure off, I'm sure, even with homes, to know that, you know what, I can do anything for 5 to 7 years.
Exactly. And, I mean, it can feel sort of overwhelming about, oh my God, I don't want to move again in 5 years. Like you don't want to plan that way. But that's the sort of rule of thumb that I often talk to first-time home buyers about. People who are renting. If you're really not sure that you're even going to stay in the state for more than a couple of years, then it might not make sense it might make sense to make a purchase, but it's not as ironclad a truth.
So there are times when you tell people that you should probably rent.
Yeah, if they really are not confident that they're going to stay in the area.
For more, what's the rule of thumb? Like 2 years or?
No, the rule of thumb is if you think you're going to be in an area for about 5, you should probably buy.
But if it's like less than 5?
Less than that, then you'd have to look at what other factors there are on the table.
And I think that calculation, right, is when do you start actually building some equity? What would you do with it? Like, what are the costs, the transaction costs of selling and buying and doing all of that? Who would do that? Would that be their financial advisor would do that for them? Or is that something you do when you look through the costs?
So I would provide them with an estimate of their cost of sale. Well, their cost of purchase, and then, down the line, their cost of sale. So, I can do that math for them. But here again, I mean, it depends on the interest rate. It depends on how much money they put into the house.
The unknowable future.
It's a case by case basis also. But that would be something that I could get them into the right ballpark. And then they would want to, look at the specifics with their lender. Like, okay, well, how much money am I sinking into this house? What could I be doing with that money instead? Should I put it, into some other investment instead? All of those things. With every situation, it's different. But I would say that you need to start asking those questions and digging into those weeds if you think you may be in an area for less than 5 years.
And I've seen quite a few people in recent times purchasing real estate for children who are going away to college or grad school, and brilliant in some ways because you have this built-in market of renters after the fact. When your child graduates, if you're in a city either that's very high demand or very rural where there aren't a lot of places to stay, you've got this built-in network of people who will rent the property from you and cover those costs until and unless you're ready to sell. Absolutely. Do you see a lot of that?
Absolutely. That's a really sort of an easy entry into owning an investment property. Yeah. If your day job is not researching and finding other good lucrative markets, other than where you live, for example. If your kid is going to school in another city, you're going to start to understand what that other city is about, or your kid is, right? Like, oh, kids don't want to rent on this street. They want to rent on that street. Oh, don't go beyond First Street because it's too far to walk to campus, or whatever is the thing. Your student is the source of your, boots on the ground knowledge.
And I would say my 2 pieces of advice on that, not legal advice, but just for what it's worth advice, is if you're buying property in other states, have your revocable trust on them. You don't want to have a probate asset in another state. And unless you really intend for child one to be the owner of that property, in exclusion of your other kids, don't put it in child one's name. They don't need to have it in their name just because they're the ones that are living there now, right? Because then that becomes another issue down the road when they move on and it's your rental property and now you co-own it with this child. Well, thank you, Kim.
Yeah.
Any parting thoughts, like any like nuggets that you want to share for either getting into the business of real estate or buying in this market, or both?
I would say for getting into real estate, I want to give it a pitch. It feels like selling real estate is challenging, and I have to wear about 20 different hats, and it really can be stressful. But it feels at the end of the day like I'm adding value to the world. I'm actually doing something that is a service that people need. I'm opening the door to people to create generational wealth in a way that is just, it's critically important. So I feel good about the work that I'm doing. And I think that the reality shows kind of, well, they aren't real.
Yeah.
And they're so ridiculous that I think that it sort of makes a mockery of what I feel can be a very honorable profession if you're serious about it and it is your full-time work. So I love what I do.
And I love having you as a resource, right? It's one of the reasons.
Likewise.
But and it's why, so Kim and I are also members of the Greenbelt Business Alliance, and we've served on the board. And it's a place where people wear a lot of hats. And one of the biggest benefits is you also get to know other business owners. So I would highly encourage anyone who is an entrepreneur or any kind of business owner to join your local business alliance, your chamber of commerce. It just opens up the world to you of resources in places where you may not know somebody who's great, and you get to know people in such a different way. Because when I refer a client to somebody, it's not just because they won this great award, but it's because I know this is a person of integrity who's going to take care of you the way that I would take care of you. And you get to see people in all different situations when you work with them in that way. Thank you so much, Kim. I will see you at coffee this week, I'm sure. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Not Your Lawyer podcast. If you'd like to connect with Kim, you can find her at kimkash.com. That's KIMKASH.com. You can find me at stellar5legal.com and on social media, LinkedIn, YouTube, and wherever you listen to your podcasts. If you found any of this information useful, please remember to follow us and subscribe. We look forward to seeing you next time on the Not Your Lawyer podcast.
You're listening to the Not Your Lawyer podcast with Mona Reza.